The race is on to get the global pandemic under control ahead of this summer's Olympic Games in Tokyo. Hi everyone, I'm Sean Caleb sitting in for Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. Welcome everyone. Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga has extended the COVID-19 state of emergency in Tokyo and other areas of Japan until June 20th. The move comes amid growing calls to delay or cancel the Summer Olympic Games ahead of its scheduled July 23rd start. As teams begin to make their way to Tokyo, the Prime Minister says the next 3 weeks are key to speeding up vaccinations and stopping the spread of the virus. There is quite a bit to talk about, so let's get straight to our panel. Victor Matheson has studied the costs and the alleged benefits of hosting the Olympic Games. He is an economics professor at the College of Holy Cross. You can see right there on his shirt. Also, journalist Mike Bako is the sports editor at dailynational.com. Also with us, Dr. Dale Fisher. He focuses on infectious diseases at the National University of Singapore and the country's National University Hospital. And we're also joined by one of Canada's most recognized figures in international sport, Dick Pound. He's a former Olympian and vice president of the International Olympic Committee. Dick, I want to start with you if I can. Japan has already lost about 12,000 or so people to COVID, more than 730,000 infected throughout the nation. Public confidence has been shaken by yet another outbreak, another wave of the pandemic. And recently, the Nikkei newspaper shows that 60% of the people in Japan are in favor of canceling or at least delaying the games. Now, you have been quoted as saying the attacks are political posturing and that barring Armageddon, the games will go on. A couple of questions. One, I read over the weekend that the IOC is the only entity that can definitively cancel the games. Is that the case? And secondly, if I can get you to expand on your comments.
Sure. The IOC and the Japanese authorities throughout this whole process have been working hand in glove. And no one organization controls what happens. The IOC does have a residual power if, in the event of war or some other disaster, saying, all right, we're out of here. That's the ultimate control. But in the case of what we're dealing with now, no decision would be made without the full cooperation and support of the public health authorities and the Japanese. And the other is that all of the information we have, the reliable information we have, is that there would be no incremental risk in hosting the games under the present conditions, that the bubble can be created and everybody that would be coming, first of all, almost all of them will be vaccinated in the first place. Mm-hmm. And secondly, the bubble will keep them from interacting with anybody else that might be vulnerable.
And Dick, what about those comments that it will go on one way or another? And secondly, I've also read a number of quotes about all the money at stake. Clearly that has to play into this to a large degree. Japan spending more than $15 billion. The IOC set to bring in, close to $2.2 to $3 billion from TV rights. To what degree is money driving this?
Money is not driving it at all, and it's too bad that gets thrown into all of these discussions. In the case of Japan, a lot of the investment is infrastructure. It's not games-related costs. I mean, you can run the games on ticket revenue and advertising and TV revenues. It's the infrastructure. But so the Olympic Village, which is $5 billion project. There is an after use already planned. There's an after use for every competition venue and so forth. So those are things that'll be around for decades to come. They're not installations that ought to be written off against a 3-week event.
If I can get the panel to listen to this, because Japan really began vaccinating in February, later than a lot of other nations. Only about 3 million people, 2.3% of the population has been vaccinated. I want you to listen to what Prime Minister Suga had to say.
We are aware that many are voicing their worries and concerns over the Olympics and Paralympics. We are listening to those voices and preparing for a safe and secure Olympics by cooperating with relevant people. By the end of June, we will have supplied 100 million shots of vaccine, and by September, we hope to secure another 100 million shots.
Dale, I want to reach out to you, get your response on this, and also to what Dick said has been said over and over and over, that the athletes will be in a bubble and they will be safe.
It's reassuring to hear. There's a lot, I think, that still needs to be explained, but both in terms of risks to the athletes and risks to the community by imported disease. Certainly hearing that most of the athletes will be vaccinated is important to the athletes, obviously, but that's I'm not sure how that's going to be ensured and monitored. But definitely, I think they can go ahead. It's just logistically incredibly challenging, as we saw with even just running the tennis event at the Australian Open in Melbourne recently. That was just one event. So with so many Olympic events, it's certainly very, very, very challenging. Mm-hmm. For a number of reasons.
Well, Dale, the fact that the outsiders, the people who are going to be watching the events, they will be from Japan. Certainly that has to be somewhat of a benefit, people not coming in from all over the world.
Well, the virus loves crowds, it loves mingling, it loves people coming from different places and allowing that sort of cross-fertilization, if you like. So that would certainly be an advantage to stop crowds from outside coming, but nonetheless, are the crowds being complete, or is the Japanese community completely separated from the athletes throughout the event before and after? Would be an important thing. Even if people are vaccinated, we know they can still be infected and spread disease, even if they don't get sick themselves. Not getting sick themselves is very important, obviously, but is an infected athlete allowed to compete? I would suggest not, which will come with a lot of disappointments around that. But at least by not getting sick, they shouldn't be putting excessive strains on what is an already strained Japanese health system.
Victor, you study the economics of sports, and the Olympics obviously included in that. And we heard Dick talk about after use, but we also heard that talked about in Sochi and in other areas where a lot of these stadiums and other facilities are basically not doing a whole lot. What are the benefits and what are the drawbacks to investing billions in infrastructure like this for a major event?
Well, so the IOC has done a really good job over the last 40 years, increasing the amount of revenues that the IOC gets itself, as well as the local organizing committee. But along with that has come a huge increase in costs. So just the national stadium, which in Tokyo, which had to be scaled back after outrage among taxpayers in Tokyo, just that stadium cost more than the entire 1984 Summer Olympic Games in Los Angeles. So we've seen this gigantic expansion of costs of hosting the games. Mr. Pound mentioned a number of $15 billion. That's the official cost now before COVID. But even before COVID hit, most people were really saying this is more like a $25 billion games. And of course, the cost of COVID's going to cost at least another $3 billion on top of that. And of course, what the local economy can hope to gain from this is, of course, way down, right? As Dr. Dale said earlier, right, is that, the virus loves it when people mingle and all come together. But of course, that's how the local operating committee makes their money, is people coming in and buying tickets, and people coming from all around the world and spending money on hotels and on restaurants and on retail establishments. And of course, very little of that is going to happen. And so what we had here was something that was not shaping up to be a particularly economically viable games even before COVID hit, and it's turned significantly worse since then.
Dick, do you think that Victor has a point there?
I wasn't quite sure what the point was.
I guess he was saying that if you're going to invest a ton of money in these games, don't expect any kind of economic windfall to come out of this, especially considering the amount of money, $15 to $20 billion, and the fact that the stadium had to be scaled back because of an outcry by taxpayers. Certainly that has come up in the past.
Yeah, and I think that's a great public involvement in that. But no, the answer is that there are long-term benefits that come from all of this. It's not, you're not going to make $15 billion in a 3-week period, but you're going to have assets out there that will be generating revenues for the community at large for years and years and years to come. And these are all community assets that are of tremendous value. And as I say, it's not, putting on the games is pretty easy in terms of paying for them. Tickets, advertising, and TV rates they'll pay for the Olympics. It's the extra stuff that the communities want to do to tie to the Olympics and get it done by a specific date that leads to these big numbers. But those are made in full knowledge of what the economics are.
Mike, I'm sorry it's taken me this long to get to you to actually talk about sports and talk about the people who have trained for years for this moment. What are your thoughts about that? There are always just these iconic moments that come out of the Olympics, and just kind of put into words, if you will, just how important this is for athletes all over the world to come together and really have a chance to compete against each other and just indicate just what tremendous athletes these folks are.
Yeah, when you think about it, it's the highs and the lows of these specific athletes. When you think about a gymnast, or when you think about a track and field star, swimming star, who really make their mark, if you want to think of them as the Wheaties box type of athletes, or Simone Biles, who will be making millions of dollars moving forward in the rest of their career. This is really their moment to shine. This is really their only moment to shine. So you're thinking about the top end athletes. That 1 year off, that potentially is costing them millions of dollars in sponsorship revenue. When you think about just your regular run-of-the-mill athlete who's potentially trained their entire life, whether they're an archer, whether they're an equestrian, or one of those sports that we don't necessarily even pay attention to unless it comes time for the Olympics, those athletes have trained their entire life for this. So just that 1 year delay has put off their training schedule, has put off their qualifying, really everything that goes into these Olympics. Just that one extra year potentially could affect their performance, could affect who's actually qualifying. So just going from 2020 to 2021 has probably changed the playing field, especially for those lower tier athletes. For those top tier athletes like your Simone Biles, they're going to be in this Olympics, they're going to be making their money, but it's for those secondary tier type of athletes. Those are the ones that have really been suffering.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it is also impossible to put a monetary figure on something like Michael Phelps winning a record number of medals and the goodwill and just the national pride from around the world that these athletes bring to their nations.
Well, you can put a monetary value on it. Michael Phelps, his job is to be Michael Phelps, most decorated Olympic athlete that there's ever been. You know, Ryan Lochte, who went into some of those same Olympics thinking that he would qualify or that he would go head-to-head with him. Right now, he's a reality TV star at best. So you can put a monetary value on winning an Olympic medal. Not necessarily you could tie $1 million to every gold medal that you could get, but if you're an Olympic medal winner, that is something that sets you up for the rest of your life. And if these Olympics don't go off this year, certainly not going off last year, that really affects the trickle down of what these athletes can do and set up for the rest of their lives.
In the case of Ryan Lochte, it also depends on how you behave after you win the medal. But I'd like to get everybody in the panel to listen to this, because this is what the head of the Japan Doctors Union had to say about safety and security concerns with the games scheduled to begin in the end of July.
Initially, the Tokyo Olympics was dubbed a Games to showcase reconstruction from the 2011 earthquake and tsunami disaster. But the Tokyo Olympics could generate yet another disaster. A new variant strain might arise and be called the Tokyo Olympic virus strain, and the criticism that the Games were a great act of folly by humankind may stalk us for the next 100 years to come.
Dick, I want to turn back to you, because you're somebody who can look at this on so many levels. An Olympic athlete in his own right, double Olympic swimming finalist in 1960 Games. You won 4 medals in the 62 Commonwealth Games. I could go on and on about all your accolades, but what does it mean to compete in front of a huge crowd like that, representing your nation?
It's really something that's unique, and it's almost hard to describe to somebody who's never had that experience. But I must say, it's one of the reasons that I've stayed involved in sport. I mean, I had so much fun doing it that anything I can do to make that kind of an experience possible for somebody else, coming after me, I'm willing to do. There's nothing on earth like it. And one of the things we should recognize is that Simone and Michael will make personal money on this, but they all the boats float higher because of them.
Right,
and it's
right.
a little bit like Tiger Woods, what he did to golf. I mean, every golfer should start every tournament on his or her knees saying, "Thank you, Tiger." The reason we're doing so well is because of you. You made golf popular. You made
those purses really go up exponentially since he began playing. But when you hear your nation's national anthem, no matter where you're from, if you are, as Mike talked about, one of these athletes from a lesser known sport, and you're competing because you love this sport, and this is your chance to be in the limelight, your concerns that there is still this tremendous effort to try and halt the games, especially with the pandemic simply not under control in Japan right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's yes and no. I mean, it's not in control or under control by Japanese standards, but compare it with the rest of the world. Compare it with the fact that we know how to prevent the spread of this. The social distancing, the mask, the clinic. We know that works. And all we have to do is be disciplined enough to follow those rules and stay out of harm's way.
Well, Dick, you've been a wonderful panelist. I know you have a previous engagement. I just wanted to get that last question before you leave us, and I thank you for your time and your insight.
Thank you very much. Good program.
If I can move on, Dale, and talk to you about what the doctors union was talking about, those variants that are coming out, the concern. You talked about if somebody tests positive, should that individual, he or she, be allowed to compete? But what are the real concerns with these variants, these strains coming out, and these people who will be coming in from all over the world?
The biggest concern at the moment is the B1617 that was first identified in India. This one is particularly slippery. It's clearly the most transmissible of them all. It's got a very short interval time between cases. We're seeing generations of cases appearing 2 days later. One instance, we had 4 generations of cases over 8 days. So this really does spread fast. You really can't keep up with it with contact tracing and quarantine and things like this. So as Mr. Pound just said, the mask wearing and the distancing is critical in preventing spread. And the creation of, pardon me, the creation of bubbles is the thing I find the most fascinating. Presumably you won't want different countries mixing or perhaps different sports mixing. You won't want any of these mixing with the Japanese community. So how you manage all that, I presume there won't be an opening or closing ceremony as we know it. So I think creating an environment for this new highly transmissible virus is the wildfire you're playing with.
Also athletes are required to sign a waiver over health and heat concerns, and Japan is considering requiring fans attending the games to show proof of a negative COVID test or vaccination. Now, that's assuming that they're going to be allowed at all. But I want you to hear what the head of Tokyo 2020 talked about, the criteria when it comes to live spectators.
The state of emergency has been extended to June 20th, and we believe it is difficult to take a decision on the number of spectators without taking this situation into account. We'll need to adapt to the criteria put in place by the government after the state of emergency is lifted, and also take into account the conditions of different sports, with some taking place outdoors and others inside.
And Dale, clearly Japan has been successful at certain sporting events, baseball, limited soccer as well. Is that going to be enough of a yardstick to hold something as involved as international Olympic Games? And you're talking about I mean, just break down to the small things, like even people competing in mixed martial arts, things of that nature. How are you going to guarantee these people are going to be safe and then flying back home or however they get back home? It just seems like there are so many questions.
Well, there's certainly a lot of questions. You need to go to the start, I think. So does everyone coming in get their 2 weeks quarantine, which would be fairly standard? Now, this is approaching 100,000 people. So I don't know where those people are supposed to go for those 2 weeks. If they're positive, what's the intention? Are you sending them back? Presumably you can't send positive people back on a plane, so you've got to find a place to keep them isolated. What's going to be your testing regime going forward once people are out of quarantine? And what do you do when they're positive, and how do you contact trace around those? So everything that the world knows about now, how to manage COVID, to do that in this sort of scaled up. I guess if it goes well, it'll look great. But it's when things start going wrong that's when I guess.
It's easy to dissect things, exactly. Now, Mike, you're a sports journalist and clearly a fan as well. And the Olympics have only been canceled, I think, 3 times. So tell me why you think the games should go on.
Well, that's the question. Should they go on? And I know Mr. Pound is not with us anymore, but he threw out a couple of statements that just really don't quite ring true, not only from what he said, but from what the IOC is saying or not saying, certainly the organizing committee. Just in terms of what he said, all the athletes will be vaccinated. That's not necessarily true. All of the U.S. athletes, the USOC has not mandated that all of the athletes be vaccinated. When you think about all the other countries that are sending athletes, there's no plausible way that all of those athletes will be vaccinated. So that's just one of the issues that these games face. The other one is that there's no real formation of any rules for what happens if an athlete in a specific sport tests positive. In the NFL or in the NBA or the Major League Baseball, you're able to delay a game. You're able to delay an NFL game for a couple of days before more contact tracing and testing goes on. But what happens if someone on the relay Olympic team tests positive? What happens if one of the wrestlers in close contact tests positive? They've not really outlined any of these rules or what will happen. Your previous guest just said if it all comes out and it all works out, this is going to be a great indication of organization, and we'll see what happens. But there are just so many things that need to be addressed that haven't been addressed, and they're almost making it almost as a wish that they're hoping that these things happen in the way that they do. Right now, Tokyo and Japan are focusing on trying to vaccinate as many people as possible. I think they're up to almost 500,000 vaccinations a day. But even if they make it at that pace to the Olympic day, that's still only 30% of the population. So that is daunting numbers to look at. Do I think that the games should go on? I think if some of these issues were resolved, I think they should definitely go on. I think that there's billions of dollars on the line. We talked earlier about the athletes and their training, and this is their moment to shine. But I also think it's really going to put a spotlight on the longevity of the Olympics. How interested are people going to be in this summer Olympic Games and moving forward? Again, Mr. Pound is not here to talk about these things, but in terms of the infrastructure, leaving these buildings, and it's for the community. The community also has to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to maintain these arenas. You look back at some of the past Olympic Games, there's this phrase called the white elephant arenas. That was originated back in Greece. A lot of those arenas and facilities right now have weeds and grass growing out of them because the Greek officials just said, hey, it's not worth it to keep some of these facilities open because people are not using them. And it's not just an Olympic issue, it's a World Cup issue, and it's a lot of these big international tournaments that are the issues.
And Victor, we heard Dick Pound, I hate to pick on him because he's not here, but we heard Dick Pound also talk about the fact that money is not playing into this. Do you buy that? Because you're one of the people who said even before COVID, this thing has the makings of being a financial fiasco.
Well, that was, in my opinion, a bit laughable. Of course it's about the money. The IOC, the sole source of their income is putting on a big event every 4 years in the winter and putting on a big event every 4 years in the summer. And if these events don't happen, that is all of their revenue for a 4-year period. And of course, you know, are much more vulnerable than, you know, like the J League, that's the Japanese soccer league, or any of the leagues in the United States or around the world. Because, you know, if the J League doesn't happen this year and like it didn't happen last year, there's a season coming up in just 1 year. But that doesn't happen with the Olympics. And of course, just like Mike said, you know, the NFL can afford to put off a game for a week or cancel a game and put it on several weeks later. That happened in the NCAA for football in the college football season in the fall quite a bit, significant delays of games. But with this 3-week period of the Olympics, that's just not possible. Delaying the Olympics again, you can't delay it just by a month. It would have to be delayed by a full year. It's almost certain that that's not going to be able to be delayed again. So, you know, I understand Mr. Pound wanting to put a brave face on this and also saying, you know, this isn't about the money. It's about the sport or the competition or the athletes. But, you know, that just doesn't ring true to me. And quite a bit of what's been coming out of the IOC has really rung fairly tone deaf for me, and obviously it has for the Japanese people as well, who overwhelmingly support canceling the Olympics at this point.
Dale, we're almost out of time, but look, as we heard, billions of dollars at stake. There are going to be 85,000 athletes from 60 nations around the globe. What about the call that the IOC must do more to ensure athlete safety, including rigorous testing? If you were the physician and a world-class athlete came to you and said, should I go, what would you tell them?
Again, I think we need more detail. I'm a bit disappointed that there hasn't been a little bit more adaptation. Why does it have to be over 3 weeks with all these people coming together at the same time? I just think it's, of course, that's what makes it the Olympics. It's the fun and the crowds and the wahoo about the whole thing. But if it really is about the events, then why couldn't we have had athletics 1 month and then swimming the next month and really try and do all that testing and isolation and all the work that needs to be done? I would also argue that the value of the Olympics will be undermined somewhat when you find that actually the 4th best athlete was the only one there, was the winner, because the other 3 were either had COVID or were contacts of COVID cases and had to be in isolation. There's going to be a lot of disappointments in that, and I also think needs to be managed and will undermine the whole event. I'm a bit pessimistic about it, to be honest.
Well, we have a lot we could go on and talk about more and more. Gentlemen, I want to thank you for your time. I found it a great discussion. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Sean Caleb's here in Washington, D.C. Thanks, everyone, for watching.